What this dog did when left alone with a baby will leave you speechless. Have you ever trusted your instincts when everyone told you that you were wrong? The red light on the camera blinked steadily. Sarah's hands trembled as she positioned it on the living room shelf, angling it just right to capture the entire room. On the carpet below, her 9-month-old daughter Emma gurgled happily, tiny fingers reaching for dust motes dancing in the morning sunlight. Beside the baby, a massive golden retriever lay perfectly still, his honey-colored eyes never leaving the child's face. "This is insane," Michael muttered from the doorway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "We're playing with our daughter's life." Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. 10 minutes, that's all I'm asking. If you're right about Duke, we'll see it. But if I'm right, she paused, meeting her husband's hard stare. Then you need to stop treating him like a monster. The argument had been building for weeks. Michael wanted the dog gone. He'd already called the shelter, arranged for pickup that very afternoon. No matter what Sarah said, no matter how many times she insisted Duke was protective, not dangerous, Michael wouldn't listen. Until she'd proposed this test. Now, standing outside the closed living room door, both parents stared at the phone screen showing the live camera feed. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd staked everything on this moment: her marriage, her judgment, her belief in the silent bond between her daughter and their dog. The golden retriever had arrived in their lives 2 years ago, a rescue with a gentle disposition and soulful eyes. Back then, Michael had welcomed him, but when Emma was born, something shifted. Michael began noticing things: the way Duke followed the baby everywhere, how he watched her constantly, positioned himself always within arm's reach. What Sarah saw as devotion, Michael interpreted as obsession. "He's stalking her," Michael had said just that morning, his voice sharp with fear. "One day he'll snap. That's what animals do." But Sarah knew better. She'd watched Duke's body language, seen the careful way he moved around Emma, how he'd flatten himself to the ground when she crawled near, making himself smaller, less threatening. She'd seen intelligence in those amber eyes, and something more: purpose. On the screen now, Emma babbled and clapped her hands, delighted by her own sounds. Duke remained motionless, except for the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. His massive body formed a golden barrier between the baby and the sharp-edged coffee table. "See," Michael whispered tensely, "he won't take his eyes off her." "Because he's watching over her," Sarah breathed. "Just wait." The minutes crawled by. Emma rolled onto her stomach, pushed herself up on chubby arms, and began that unsteady crawl she'd just mastered. Duke's head lifted slightly, tracking her movement. When she veered toward the table leg, he shifted position, subtle, deliberate, placing his body in her path. Emma bumped into his soft fur and changed direction, giggling. Michael's jaw clenched. He's controlling where she goes. "He's protecting her from hitting her head," Sarah corrected, her voice barely audible. Then everything changed. A soft whirring sound filled the room. On screen, a round gray object rolled into view: the robotic vacuum, programmed to start its daily cleaning cycle. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She'd forgotten about the vacuum, and she remembered what it meant. Duke had always been terrified of that machine. Once, months ago, it had caught his tail, pulling fur and skin, causing him to yelp in pain and terror. Since then, he'd fled whenever it turned on, hiding in the bedroom until it finished its rounds. The vacuum rolled steadily across the floor, headed straight for Emma. Duke's entire body went rigid, his ears pressed flat against his skull. Sarah saw his haunches tense, watched as the fur along his spine stood on end. She knew that posture. It was fear, primal and instinctive. "It's just the vacuum," Michael muttered, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Sarah gripped the phone tighter. The vacuum was 3 feet from Emma now, 2 feet. The baby reached for it, fascinated by the movement. Duke could have run. Every instinct must have been screaming at him to flee from the thing that had hurt him. Instead, he moved forward. In one fluid motion, the retriever placed himself completely between Emma and the approaching machine. His broad chest became a wall, his body a shield. The vacuum bumped against his side, and Sarah saw him flinch, but he didn't move away. Emma laughed and grabbed a handful of his golden fur. The vacuum reversed, preparing to route around the obstacle. Duke tracked it with his eyes, his body tense but unwavering. When the machine tried to go around him toward the baby, he shifted, blocking it again. Then the vacuum got tangled in the edge of a rug and lurched forward, erratically, straight at Emma. Duke barked, a deep, commanding sound that rattled the phone speaker. He lunged, hitting the vacuum with his muzzle, sending it spinning away toward the far corner of the room. His teeth never touched it. He'd used only his nose, controlling his strength perfectly. Emma shrieked with delight at the noise and the sudden movement. She grabbed Duke's neck, burying her tiny face in his fur. The dog stood perfectly still, letting her hold on, his eyes still locked on the vacuum until it bumped into the wall and powered down. Only then did he relax. He lowered himself carefully to the floor, curling his body in a protective semicircle around Emma, who was now babbling happily and patting his back. In the hallway, Sarah couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down her face. Michael stood frozen, his phone hand shaking. His mouth opened, closed. His face had gone pale. "He faced the thing he's most afraid of," Sarah whispered. "He could have run, he should have run, but he protected her instead." The timer on Sarah's phone buzzed, 10 minutes. Without a word, she pushed open the living room door. Duke raised his head, tail wagging gently. Emma looked up and squealed, reaching for her mother. Sarah scooped up her daughter and pressed her face against the baby's soft hair, then reached down to place her hand on Duke's head. "Good boy," she choked out. "Such a good boy." Michael entered slowly, like a man in a dream. He stared at the dog, at his daughter, at his wife. "I was going to." He couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah looked at him, and in her eyes was both forgiveness and a quiet triumph. "But you didn't." Michael knelt beside Duke. The dog watched him calmly, without fear or resentment. Slowly, Michael extended his hand, letting it rest on the retriever's head. His fingers trembled. "You're not going anywhere," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Duke's tail thumped once against the floor. That night, after Emma had been put to bed, they watched the video again. And again. Each viewing revealed new details. The way Duke had positioned himself before the vacuum appeared, as if he'd heard it starting from the other room. The split-second calculation in his eyes when he'd chosen to face his fear. The careful control when he'd knocked the vacuum away, never letting his terror turn to aggression. Michael sat with his head in his hands. "I almost took him away. I almost." "But you listened," Sarah said softly. "When it mattered, you listened." In the weeks that followed, Michael became Duke's shadow, the way Duke had always been Emma's. He watched them play, saw how the dog adapted to the baby's every developmental stage, staying close when she was unsteady, giving space as she grew more confident, always present but never intrusive. One evening, Sarah found Michael sitting on the floor outside Emma's room, Duke beside him. Man and dog sat in companionable silence, both listening to the soft sounds of the baby sleeping. "Thank you," Michael whispered to the dog, "for being better than I was, for seeing what I couldn't." Duke's tail swept the floor once, twice. The camera was still there on the shelf, though they'd never needed to use it again. Sometimes Sarah would catch Michael looking at it, and she knew he was remembering how close he'd come to making a terrible mistake, remembering the moment his certainty shattered and truth took its place. Emma was 3 years old now, and Duke was graying around the muzzle. But every night, without fail, he took his position outside her door. And every night, Michael would sit with him for a few minutes, hand resting on the dog's head, grateful beyond words. Because they'd learned something that 10-minute video had taught them. Sometimes the truth isn't what we think we see. Sometimes it's what we're too afraid to look at. Sometimes courage means facing the thing that terrifies you. And sometimes love means trusting when everyone tells you you're wrong. Has a pet ever surprised you by showing intelligence or emotion you never expected? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that instinct and trust matter, that sometimes the quietest guardians are the most faithful ones.